Sounds good.
You're on.
There are a couple changes to the agenda. One is I've got number 2 and 3, which are really the same thing. And that's something that Anjali will be discussing. And I've added the part of the conservation program with Christine, something I neglected to do when I first sent out the agenda. And conservation is something I think the city does really, really well from all appearances. And it's something the county, I think we as county residents need to look to the city and start thinking about things that we can do in terms of conserving water. And so that's something that we need to think about. So Anjali, all of you that don't know Anjali is the water resources manager with this Santa Fe County, who is relatively new to county government. Is that correct? How long have you been working with the county now?
About 2.5 years, but fairly
really?
new to this position is fairly new. I've only had this position for maybe a month and a bit. So
okay. So with that, I'll let you go ahead and start your presentation. Give us a little history. I guess we could go ahead and, do you know everybody that's on this? That would be helpful too, wouldn't it?
I don't know that I do. I know the city folks and Andy. I don't know that I know the others. So.
Okay. So you know Christine, you know Andy. Felicity, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Anjali. I'm Felicity Brennan. I'm one of the former directors of the Santa Fe Watershed Association and co-chair of this group, and just continue to keep involved with it, even though I'm not at the Watershed Association anymore.
Tricia, you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, I'm Patricia Dominguez. I work for Senator Heinrich out of his Santa Fe office, and I cover the natural resources portfolio. So water falls under part of that.
Really appreciate you being here, Tricia.
Absolutely. Really. Yeah, you always have interesting things. I'm also, I have another meeting starting at 11, so come 11 o'clock, I'll be gone. But I love keeping track of what's going on in the area. Thank you for inviting me.
Efren, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Efren Morales. I'm the superintendent at the wastewater treatment facility for the city of Santa Fe.
Thank you, Efren. Thank you for being here today. Bob, good morning.
Bob
is with the busted. Anyway, Bob is with the Game and Fish Department, and again, as I said earlier, gives us all kinds of guidance about what we can and can't do with some of the critters that inhabit the wetlands below the wastewater treatment plant. So Anjali, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, and you can present. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. As Carl said, I'm the water resources manager for Santa Fe County. It's a new position for the county that I'm taking on. Previously, I've been doing a lot of water resources stuff for the county. My primary position previously was managing the Amit water rights settlement, but it sort of morphed into a lot of other things. So I'm happy to have this title and be formally doing a lot more. So one of the things that I've been working on, as the agenda alludes to, is long-range water planning. And we're really glad to be doing this in consultation with the city. We're really hoping that our two processes can be really closely tied, and we're working together so that these long-range plans are tied together and make sense as we continue to work together as two separate agencies that are very closely tied in our operations. So I know that the city has probably come and talked to you about I believe Carl said that, the city has talked to you about their water planning. I don't know from a county perspective, we have a huge amount to add to that, but I can give sort of an update on where we are and what the county is doing in terms of plugging into what the city's processes are. We're really lucky, the city is a much larger operation over there, so we feel lucky to be able to kind of piggyback on some of the work that Jesse and Bill and their team are doing. But we're really wanting to plug in our information and make sure that those efforts meet our needs as well. So, as you probably know, this is going to be a sort of a 5-year planning process. We kind of completed our first year, which included some public outreach, just trying to scope out what these each year in this 5-year process will look like. So we completed that process at the end of 2020. And going forward, this year, the goal is we're trying to look at supply and demand scenarios, and also to start building out a model that actually can help us start thinking through these scenarios. This is something obviously that the city is working on. And so the county right now is trying to develop a scope with the same consulting firm, Hayes and Sawyer, that the city already has a contract with. They are building a model, and our hope is that we can kind of piggyback on that scope and pay for the sections of the model that would be county specific, including, our native water rights portfolio of BDD and our demand scenarios that are outside of the city. And so that, I don't have too much concrete updates to share with you. We're sort of working through that process, going through our sole source requirements in order to, use the same consulting firm as a sole source contract. We have to notice that and do some paperwork to justify that from a procurement perspective. So that's that piece. We're also going to start, thinking about our supply and demand scenarios, and hope to utilize our Water Policy Advisory Committee, which Carl is now a newly elected member too. So we're very excited to have him on the WPAC. And as we start thinking about, what we expect our supply to be in the future, and particularly what we expect our demand to be, those demand questions are a little bit subjective, of what we expect people to use, what sort of conservation measures we should be or could be implementing, and how we expect those scenarios to play out over time. It's going to be really helpful to have some community input. So that's sort of the update on that. I can take questions, or if you had specific things you'd like me to talk about.
Anjali, when you say model, would you define that a little bit for me?
Yeah, so it's still being developed. My understanding, we're still really working on figuring out how we can plug into the city's model that they're building. But the idea is that it will help us. We can really take some really specific scenarios, of what will our demand be as it grows, as it changes, what supply might look like, what supply interruptions there might be. We could run sort of scenarios of sort of what if calculations of, what if the BDD shuts down for X number of days? What if, and how those different supplies are used over time, and then what our water situation is given those scenarios. So we'll be able to run, hopefully, a lot of different options through that as we think through our long range plan. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. That helps a whole lot. Any questions, folks?
Well, it's curious to me. I'm just thinking about all the people on the wells that don't have any kind of a gauge on them. For example, my house, and probably most of the people out here. I live out in out Old Santa Fe Trail in the county. Like, how do you account for something like that?
Yeah, it's something that we are thinking about. I sort of have two different hats, and John Dupuy, our utility director, has to think. Our formal job is we work for the Santa Fe County Utilities Division, and we run a water utility that has supplies that provide to our set of customers. But the county, of course, is much larger than that. Mm-hmm. And in this, the 40-year water plan is a statutory requirement for utilities. So we do have to have in some way focus on actual utility customers. But yeah, domestic wells are a huge concern for us as well. And definitely it comes up in WPAC meetings a lot of sort of what do we do in terms of drought management and planning for the future in terms of domestic wells. And it's a struggle for us in terms of jurisdiction, of what we can actually do when people have a legal right to their wells. And we don't administer water rights, and we don't have that statutory authority as a county government. But one of the things, this is less to do with our water planning. I think in terms of the water plan, we are considering how we can at least bring in communities that we anticipate might be customers in the next 40 to 80 years. So Old Santa Fe Trail might be a place that, that area, looking at, Chupadero and El Dorado and La Cienega, and places that we think that in all likelihood, we might be running utility lines or taking over mutual domestics in the future. We are considering how those sort of demands could be incorporated into this planning. It gets a little tricky. We can't include everything because it just gets too complicated. But on the other side, one of our work tasks for the WPEC this year is thinking about sort of education and conservation and those types of more voluntary efforts that don't necessarily include things that people have to do, but how we might include domestic wells in more voluntary educational aspects is something we're sort of concurrently thinking about.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. It's an interesting, difficult conundrum.
Oh,
it is.
I'm sorry, William isn't here. He's part of the, I always forget the name. It's the Basin Well Organization. And so there's obviously some very serious concerns about wells. Now, I'm going to ask if, the last, Anjali actually presented at our board meeting, the La Cienega Valley Association board meeting on Monday. I double booked her. Actually, I'll see her again this afternoon. So anyway, we have the La Cienega watershed conditions. Are those unique in Santa Fe County?
I don't know. I'm not 100% sure if they're totally unique, but they're unusual in terms of the requirement to connect to the water utility when it becomes available. We do have plat restrictions. The 0.25 acre feet is countywide. That's our water rights restriction for any sort of new development. I must say I'm learning a lot more about sort of land use and development. It's not something that I have done a lot of work in to date. So not necessarily an expert.
Yeah. Well, we're glad you're there.
I guess everybody. What'd you say, Felicity?
I just said, we're glad you're there.
Thank you.
That there's stuff being done. Yeah.
No, I mean, the La Cienega watershed conditions were created in the 90s in anticipation of development. And obviously that's happened, and we're still trying to catch up and figure out how to address what I call the lot split subdivision in Upper La Cienega. And I'm estimating at least 400 homes that have come in, and they're all on wells. And most of them, if not all of them, don't understand what happens with when they use more water than they're supposed to. So that's certainly an ongoing concern. And we've been in close contact with Anjali and John Dupuy about what we can do in terms of hooking up to the county water system. So we're hopeful that will happen or take place sometime in the near future. Now, one of the things we talked about on Monday too is the work that's going to be done about the connection with the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, which I think is something that's really important and something that is beneficial to everybody. And would you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces in terms of planning right now. Again, I don't know that I have really concrete updates on this, but I can talk about our general plan and our expectations going forward. There's sort of three pieces that we're thinking about in the sort of La Cienega, El Dorado sort of area. And, so the first piece is Working with Carl, we had submitted a CIP capital improvement project request to do a master plan within the La Cienega area to try to consider how best to address some of the water issues in the area in terms of how we might connect the people using the most water, or what is the best bang for our buck in terms of addressing concerns at the La Cienega Springs in terms of bringing county water to that area. So that's one sort of piece that I think is going forward. It seems like we're going to get some state funding for that, which is great. The second piece is what Carl is alluding to, is sort of thinking and expanding on a lot of the work that the New Mexico Tech Bureau of Geology has done in terms of monitoring in the La Cienega area, but trying to expand that out to look at all of the areas that impact La Cienega. And it's sort of including that, and not to sort of over model things, but to have a more comprehensive model of how, El Dorado and a lot of other surrounding communities and the Penn, State Penn, and all of the other big users in that area, to learn more about how groundwater moves all throughout that area, and to have a more thorough model of how that works. That could then connect to that master planning process so that we really understand, maybe it's not connecting a bunch of small water users in La Cienega that's the best idea. Maybe it could be, learning what those other options are to make sure that we're using our funds most effectively to meet the end goal of improving water resources and, traditional uses and in-stream flows and all of the goals that we want. So that's the second piece. And then there's this third piece that our sustainability office is working on, which is, the metering requirement as part of the La Cienega watershed conditions, and how we can best meet the actual requirements that we currently have statutorily to enforce those conditions and meter. So they're all kind of connected. They're all sort of different funding sources and are moving at different paces. The monitoring portion, we are working on a scope that we hope to go out to RFP in the next, and hopefully by the end of this fiscal year is our goal. So by July, to help us kind of scope out what information is out there already, what people have already done. The city has done some work in that area and has, a regional model already. And so how we might use that data to expand into the La Cienega El Dorado area. So we're working with John Shoemaker and Associates to help us scope out that project.
For those of you that don't know, part of the La Cienega watershed conditions required people who basically came in as a result of lot splits to meter their wells. So, and provide that information on, I think it was a biannual basis, was to report their meter readings to the county. Well, it was 3 years ago that one of our board members, Robert Romero, checked with the county and found out it had never been done. And so we're catching up right now. And it is obviously a very complex issue and something that is going to take some time. But one of the things that really impressed me, now Jacqueline Beam, who some of you know, is the sustainability manager. So she is going to be working with Anjali in a sense, or working in conjunction in terms of dealing with this requirement that wells be metered. And so one of the things that impressed, I think, our board on Monday is the emphasis on scientific information, not political information, but scientific information to drive these kinds of decisions. And I think that's something that really we need to emphasize more, because it's pretty easy to get into the political realm and have those kind of political battles that don't produce or help us in any way. And so to have the Bureau involved in any level, to have, as I think was said on Monday night, to have the experts to help guide this is something that we think is of great importance. So Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions, folks? Well, we do have a small crowd. I mean, this would happen in a normal meeting anyway. Sometimes we just have a small group of folks, and certainly I personally like smaller groups. We get more done, it seems. And so let's lead into Christine, and Christine can talk about her conservation efforts. And again, I think this is something that the county can learn from, something that we need to do, or at least educate our community members more about the importance and need to conserve water. So Christine, welcome, and thank you for being here. Anjali, thank you so much. And I know you've got to take off in a second, but thank you. Please give our best to John and to Jacqueline. And I am going to start conducting tours, and I'll put you guys at the top of the list. I've added a couple of stops. I'm going to include El Rancho de los Colondrinos. That's the last stop now. So you can see a traditional use of the water. But it's an interesting tour. Rael Ranch will be included, Tres Rios Ranch, probably Ed Series Place. And there'll be a series of stops along the way so you can get a real picture or an idea of the importance of water in these little communities downstream. So thank you. All right, Christine.
Thanks so much.
Welcome. You're welcome. Christine, thank you. And again, I want to thank you for having Felicity on and I on your radio show. I thought it was fun. It was a good exchange of ideas and thoughts, and I appreciate you allowing us to be a part of that.
Oh, it was so wonderful having you guys as guests. I'm really excited to be having more conversations with this group. I know Andrew has been coming to these meetings for a couple years, and so I'm really happy to kind of come in and learn from all of you too. And I'd be interested in that tour. Carl, you have to let us know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Zoom. Go ahead. It's so hard on Zoom to like.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, my name is Christine Chavez. I think I've met all of you, and I'm really happy that Anjali talked a little bit about some of the work between the city and the county currently. There is this misconception that we sort of don't work very much together, but you know, Jesse Roach and John Dupuis and Shannon Jones, I mean, are constantly in meetings. And Anjali and I really have started working more closely together, and Jacqueline Beam came from this city. So we had a relationship before she moved over to the county, and I'm really happy to be reconnecting. And, you know, you've got some great people working on water issues for the county, and it's a great, you know, time for us to start working together on thinking about things on a more regional effort. You know, Andrew was talking before the meeting started a little bit about, you know, some of the challenges that we're facing now. You know, there's no denying that we're in pretty dry conditions right now going into the summer. We all know from the front page of the paper that, you know, there is more limited surface water supply coming our way. And so we're working to figure out how we meet that challenge. And working for the city of Santa Fe, just a little bit about myself. You know, I've worked with the state engineer's office for quite some time, right after I graduated from college. And I worked for the city of Las Cruces as their water conservation person. And then I went up to Los Alamos, and I had a really unique opportunity to deal with water and energy conservation together in the same program. But huge differences in like the way water is used down south relative to the way water is used in Los Alamos. And that's all groundwater in both of those situations. There, you know, it's groundwater only. And so then I come to Santa Fe, and I was raised here and went to school here, and feel so blessed to come back and work in this community. But such an amazing water system to work within, right? I mean, there's multiple sources. There's this really advanced infrastructure. It's, you know, a very diverse water portfolio, and water conservation, you know, for all of you, I mean, we're placed in a really, I think Felicity used the word conundrum, and we're kind of in this unique position. You know, we're sort of the utility is mandated to conserve water. And so that's why our office and our resources are there. But yet the utility sells water. And so it's just this weird thing, you know, I mean, the engineers talk about sort of our water portfolio and they're so proud of it. And I'm proud of it. It's complex. It's very resilient. We have multiple places that we pull water from, which makes us more resilient against the challenges of drought. You know, if we do get limited surface water supply coming our way, we have a way to deal with that. And, you know, whenever we go to groundwater, people start to sort of wonder, I mean, like, wow, we're actually pumping water out of the ground. We've been so reliant on surface water. And so it's challenging for water conservation to kind of find our place, right? I mean, the engineers, like, we're good. We've got great water planning in motion. We're looking at adding additional resources to that portfolio to make us even more resilient against the face of drought. But there is always sort of the conservation message that can be lost. You know, right away, it's like, well, we're in drought. What are we doing? What, you know, how much more can we do? What are we doing today? This is an emergency. And for us, it's kind of hard to realize that like things are kind of working as they were intended to work. I mean, this is in the face of drought and the face of limited surface water supply. We want our system to be resilient. And so that's what it's showing. But the need to conserve water is always there and has never been more serious than it is right now. You know, I mean, the reason the utility is in such great shape is because our demand is so low because of all the conservation efforts and because we're a very water conscious community. I mean, working here in Santa Fe compared to working in Los Alamos or Las Cruces, everybody here gets it. And so I'm really proud to do the work that we do here. And Andrew, you know him very well. I mean, he's one of our staff members, but we have 3 other people that work for us: Ramon Coriz, Robert Wood, and Mario Torres. And we have a really, really comprehensive water conservation program. And I was going to present some of those pieces to you today, and Andrew and I were going to split it up, but because of this interesting intro that we've started off with, I think we kind of stay on the topic of city-county work together on water conservation. So, you know, I've been, even in the last meeting that I was in with all of you, you know, there was this discussion of that one memo that talks about regionalization and the discussions that we can or maybe can't have related to that. And there's a lot of, I mean, I think that there's a lot of, how do I say it? I guess the memo seems to kind of be a hindrance to the work that we're doing together. But for all of us, I mean, water conservation is something that is easy for us to work on together. I mean, I realize when we talk about drought and regionalization, and I mean, there's a lot of moving parts with that, even the planning pieces with that, you know, can be complex. But what we did land on together is that we are interested in working on water conservation together. And the more I involve the county, the more successful our program in the city will be. Because, you know, saving water doesn't stop at the county line, or that, I guess the need for us to do something doesn't stop, you know, at that ground. And we talk about that all the time. I don't have to tell you guys that. So water conservation is something that we're working on. And I did speak to the WPAC group a couple weeks ago, and we have the city's water conservation committee. And so we have these 2 advisory groups. And Carl, I'm excited to hear that you're on the WPAC now, and maybe I can pull you into some of this work now that you're newly appointed. But we have a couple people, you know, from the WPAC who are going to be working closely with a few members of the Water Conservation Committee to really start looking at water conservation opportunities. One inconsistency is that, you know, our messaging right now is not aligned. We have different time of days, we have different, you know, times that you can irrigate. So we're going to come together and we're going to unify that message. That's going to be one of the first things. You know, we're going to do a survey of all the water conservation ordinances where I feel the county could easily kind of come in and play a part. And that's one of them. So working on messaging together, talking about water conservation in the context of the entire county, of which the city is included, I think is just a no-brainer, something we've got to do. Especially now during drought, we need to unify that drought message and reach the, you know, the city and county residents in the same manner and provide them with the same resources. And fortunately, a lot of the resources that the city has come up with are completely applicable to what the county would consider helpful. We are working on, we've had a lot of momentum recently. I don't know if you guys have heard, but we have this new campaign called Bees, Trees, and Water. And the bee people approached us. And I'm seriously, I can't believe I never talked to the bee people before, because it opened up a relationship between us and 27 other nonprofit city departments, county departments, I mean, to all work on bees. And so I'm so excited that that happened, because the people that want to talk about bees also are interested in trees, are also interested in climate change, are also interested in water conservation. And so we're done talking about, oh, this is a great plant for you to plant. Here's a list of plants for you to plant that are native. We're advancing that message now. Now it's like, we know we're dealing with less water moving forward. We know that the outdoor sector is going to be affected first. And we want to start teaching people to really start thinking about what we're putting in the ground. I mean, I'm totally guilty of going to Lowe's and buying those pretty flowers that just last me through this summer, that take so much water, that really don't serve any other purpose except like my own personal pleasure. We're done with that. Like, now we have to really think of what we're putting in the ground, how much water it's going to take, how we can get additional water to that planting through gray water or rainwater or captured stormwater. And the plant itself has to serve multiple purposes now. I mean, it's got to serve as a pollinator habitat, as an edible plant. I mean, it has to have multiple contributions to the outdoor sector. So we're using this momentum with these groups to kind of build that message. We're really focusing on the outdoor sector now. We've done a lot of great job, on addressing indoor water efficiency, but it's shifting now with every utility in New Mexico. I mean, just in the Southwest in general, we've got to really start looking at what we're putting in the ground and the kind of demand that we are either increasing or, working at managing a little bit better. Our other focus is in the commercial sector. Right now we're doing a lot of work on restaurants, hotels, shopping centers. We've got a training program established through the community college that I think that the county can easily jump into. But there's a lot of things. Andrew, I saw you raise your hand. Do you want to jump in with something?
Just waving goodbye to Anjali as she ducked off there. Sorry. I was trying to be real subtle, but that clearly not mine.
Well, Andrew, I hope you just jump in on any of this. This is just, I'm wanting to kind of throw this out to this group, and I'm hoping for some feedback. So help me where I'm missing some some points. But we're hoping these two committees are going to come together now to identify really quick opportunities for the county to jump in to the water's conservation, to the city's water conservation efforts. And like I said, we have this avenue through the community college where the county can take advantage of hiring auditors that we've trained through that institution to do irrigation audits on our behalf, to do commercial restaurant, hotel, and even more general like shopping center audits. So that's a way for them to grab that expertise and pull it into their system and see, what savings they can identify. We also have a pretty comprehensive education program, and we talk about water conservation in the context of the whole process. So we have a passport program. Our kids go out to BDD to learn about where water comes from and how it's treated and how it makes its way into the city's water system. They get to go to our water fiesta where we have several different people, giving them information about, water conservation from different perspectives. And we also teach them about the city's water system with the desktop water conservation model that maybe you guys have seen or haven't seen, but I'd be happy to present to you at some point. And then they learn about recycling, they learn about keeping their environment clean, and they learn about, pollution that goes into the river when those things aren't taken care of. They learn about the water in the river being a source of, their water that they, get it as part of the city. We talk about domestic wells. We talk about, sewage treatment, like in rural environments. And then we talk about the wastewater treatment plant. And so, Efren, this is for you. It's a really critical part of what we teach kids, because everyone just thinks of the wastewater treatment plant. Well, I mean, we know what everybody thinks of the wastewater treatment plant, but I mean, for me, honestly, it's just the most amazing science that takes place. It's the best place to work. I mean, as far as like putting together the biology and the treatment and, you know, filtration. I mean, there's so much. So we really focus on the wastewater treatment plant. Like that's where water goes at the end of the cycle. So where does it come from? How it's treated? How is it distributed? What are external factors that we need to take care of related to our environment and our water resources? And then finally, where does it go at the end of its cycle? And how is it retreated and reused and recycled? So with COVID, we couldn't do that. You know, they were going on field trips. We had expanded that program so that those fourth graders in the passport program would go on to do the My Water, My Watershed program with the Santa Fe Watershed Association. And then we were working on the sixth grade component before COVID hit. Now we're really relying on the expertise of the Santa Fe Watershed Association. Again, I'm working with Maury to develop sort of a passport supplemental activity, I guess. So it's going to be a backpack with activities in it. And we're going to allow the county to develop one of those activities for the first time. So they may want to focus on domestic wells or a message around that. And we're going to help them do that, help you guys do that. So I'm trying to find ways in every single one of our programs for the county to fit, because water conservation is something that we should definitely work on together. And it's a no-brainer. And there's lots of ways for the county to kind of, come in right now, whereas a couple years ago, those same avenues weren't there. So I did want to talk a little bit about where we're going with the county, the work that we're trying to do. I'm really excited about it. I think that when we do this piece of work, and if we're really successful in this work, then I think it will kind of build the bridge to talk about things that are more complicated, such as, well, some of the challenges that you guys have brought up here today. So the only last thing that I do want to say about the work with the county and the city, before we kind of take questions, Andrew and I, on things you're interested in, is we do have a training opportunity coming up in June. It's June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and it's called the Next Generation Water Summit. And for the first time this year, we are aligning it with some community activities that I think everyone's going to be interested in the city and the county. And we are paying the fee for all city or county residents who want to attend the conference. And so I'll be coming back to you with more information, but just keep those dates, on your calendar, June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. It's going to be a track of very technical training from, water experts, really from all over we have like the Alliance for Water Efficiency coming. We have, California agencies presenting. We have Catherine Hayhoe as our keynote. It's a pretty impressive agenda of technical, training. But then we're also going to have another set of training related to pollinators and outdoor demand and the Bees, Trees, and Water campaign. We're going to have demonstration tours of a couple different city gardens that kind of show those different applications. We're doing a pollinator seed giveaway. We have some artists at the rail yard painting some rain barrels for us that we'll be raffling off. But the rail yard is going to be a partner in that and have some traffic there on that weekend. We'll have some traffic at our water conservation demo garden off San Mateo. And then we have a rain garden demonstration pilot with Reese Baker. And what he's going to show is a rain garden under construction so that people can kind of see like what happens below the surface of a rain garden and how can those types of applications be replicated. And then he'll walk us over to a garden that's already been planted and, already has plants pretty established. But the goal there is with the rain gardens, we're kind of trying to demonstrate that we have different plantings within a rain garden that could consist of a tree, but the tree can be a pollinator tree, and the shrubs that are planted there can also be pollinator oriented. And so, and the really cool part about the rain garden is that those plantings get additional water through the stormwater flows that, that feed into it. So the idea now is plants serving multiple purposes and always having a supplemental source of irrigation. So there's a lot of exciting things aligned with the Next Generation Water Summit, and I will be coming back to you guys and giving you the way to register, but I hope to see all of you there and to get your feedback. And hopefully it's technical training coupled with some really hands-on training for all of our local city and county residents.
Cool.
So that's a lot of talking for me. So I'll let you guys ask whatever questions you'd like, and Andrew and I can work on answering them for you.
I'm just impressed. I mean, it's one of those things where, wow. I mean, you really have taken this a long way. And certainly in the county, we need to catch up. And so if there's anything I can do in my new role or in any role to foster that, I certainly will be part of that. I guess on some level, I just didn't realize how extensive the work that the city is doing is. I'm a little stunned, in all honesty. It's just like, wow. And I really look forward to this thing in June. This would be really cool to have that take place.
Well, I feel bad for not blowing you away even more, because we had a whole presentation which talk about every component of our program. Andrew, are there any like important points you think that we should talk about related to our programming? And
would it be really antisocial for me to try and put up a graph for just a moment that I could show you that shows kind of some of the achievements of conservation?
Please.
All right, let's see if I can, now that I know it's appropriate, it's a matter of whether I'm capable of doing that. So
You might need permission to share the screen.
oh,
Yeah.
Andy, is that something?
Looks like you've got it, so that's cool.
Cool, thanks. Oh, it looks like you have disabled participant screen sharing.
No, I haven't. Let's see. Multiple.
I
There
can
we
put
go.
it on my other screen and turn it around.
Yeah. Okay, try that one.
Awesome.
oh, this glass looks huge on the screen.
Okay. So this is this graph that we use all the time, and everyone likes it except for Christine. So hopefully that'll be true of the rest of this group too. But the reason I put it up, we're working on our annual report right now, so I have this handy. But this is showing the water use by the city since it purchased the utility from P&M, which was in 1995. So back then the usage was about 13,000 acre feet a year. And since that time, despite the growth, it's come down to about 9,000 a year is about the line right here in the middle of all these. And it's a huge accomplishment, right? I mean, it's hard to even, look at reducing that as the population went up, because if you had the previous years, you'd have the sense that this was actually climbing too, up until 1995. Mm-hmm. So I mention it because, I think conservation, when you look at the older planning documents, I think one of the things they really undervalued was the potential of conservation to change people's behavior about water and saving it. So the old stuff from the 80s, from back when it was P&M and the Metropolitan Water Board, it kind of, the best they were hoping for was sort of slowing down the rate of increase of demand. And in fact, it's been totally reversed, because conservation's been a lot more effective than people had thought. And personally, I think a lot of it comes from kind of just the overwhelming, like all that stuff Christine said. It's like all those things are important individually, but also just the sort of pervasiveness of that message, I think, is part of what makes that really successful. And that Santa Feans are like interested in that, right? It's a community that's got a long-term commitment. So I'm just going to show one other cool thing on the graph, and then I'll go back to the social squares. So the other cool thing here is the surface water piece, right? So this orange line is the amount of surface water that the utilities used. So this light blue piece here, that's when the Buckman direct diversion came online, and this dark blue is the Santa Fe River. So since BDDs come online, we're up even last year with kind of a raise in we drain the reservoirs to some extent, but by doing that, we still hit close to 90% of our total demand with surface water. So that's, good news for conservation. And I just wanted to kind of show off a little bit, because it does seem like the impact of it has been, it like feels real good, and there are all the rebates, and there's all the stuff in schools, and they're all important programs. But I think even more than that, it's just almost the fact that there is a conservation office, and that's a value that people are kind of understanding. So now I've talked a long time.
No, that's a really interesting graph. And I'm curious what the population was in 1995 versus now, and how that correlates. And I mean, I guess there's a pretty straightforward way of calculating the number of acre feet that have been saved or whatever. because of the conservation efforts, or I don't know, but just what, do you know how that
About a
correlates with
30%
population?
increase. But
How
one of
much?
the it's roughly a 30% increase over that period.
population.
I don't know. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I know that it's just a little bit shy of 30%. One thing that happened in there is that the county, there was an annexation. You all probably remember this. There was an annexation agreement with the county back in 2012, which was a big deal. I wasn't working at the city then, but as I understand it, the city annexed a little bit of land, almost all of it moving south towards La Cienega every single year between 1995 and 2012. And then that's it. The music stopped, and we haven't done that in the last 9 years. And there's an agreement. I don't really know the terms, but yeah, so that also happened in that period. So the county residents kind of came off of the total, and that's something on the order of, I don't know, it's maybe 1,500 acre feet now, roughly. Thankfully, Anjali's not here to correct me because I'm probably horrifically oversimplifying.
Andrew, can you pull up the GPCD graph? Because that's
Sure. Actually, there is a GPCD piece right on this. You can. Oh, we have the one with population. Yeah. Give me just a sec.
that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sorry, everybody. Let's see.
Andrew usually saves me when I'm in this spot. He's not looking to me for help.
All right, let's see. Here we go. So, yeah, this is working great. I can't even see it. Okay, so here's the GPCD relative to population over time. So same period of time from 1995 to 2020. And this red line is the GPCD. It kind of goes down, interestingly, kind of in these like jumps, right? Like it kind of jumps here, it does it again here. I don't know why, it just seems to do that. And so you can see that we've reduced the use a lot over time from, 168 seems really high, but certainly in the 130s, it seems like a kind of sustained level. And we're down now at a GPCD that's between 85 and 95. And we saw last year actually that the GPCD went up with drought, which actually seems like a good thing, right? Like we're using less water when there's more water available. I mean, at some point you're low enough that you're kind of using the appropriate amount of water so that you could actually see the difference. So we might be getting there.
I'm so sorry to be so ignorant. What does GPCD stand for?
Oh my gosh, that's me being the government employee, like ingrained bureaucrat who speaks in acronyms. No, sorry. That's gallons per capita per day. So basically the amount of water that the city produced divided by the population, and broken up by a day. So it's not exactly the same as how much you would use in your house, because it includes, the landscaping at the plaza and all kinds of stuff that's used, the parks irrigation, but it breaks it down. So this is sort of one individual Santa Fe water consumer's portion of that total usage. And it's what we report to the state engineer's office. So a lot of like comparisons are done, at least in New Mexico, based on GPCD, because everybody has to turn that in to the state engineer.
One thing about the GPCD that's interesting is that water use is really driven by weather, so Andrew kind of did touch on that, but like in 2020 with COVID, everybody was at home and water use did go up. I mean, people were calling us, we were really, really busy last spring. People who were at home trying to work on their yards, trying to get recommendations on what to plant, looking at our rebates, wanting to take advantage of that, and really looking at leaks and resources to fix them. So it really, there's a lot more water being used in the residential sector than in the commercial sector, as a direct result of COVID. But there's a lot of opportunity for us there when we see that increase, because we know that there's more resources that we could provide during this time where people are making that more of a priority. So it's interesting, but just COVID and the shift in water use, is informing a lot of the things that we're trying to do this time or this year. But, this is sort of our measurement, water conservation's measurement, the GPCD. And so you'll hear that probably again, and now you'll know like, okay, that's what the city's trying to talk about.
Well, it's also interesting because I think of like all the hotels that were empty last year and how that, and restaurants that weren't functioning during a particular period of time, specifically during summer, and no opera tours. And so it seems, it's interesting that given how savvy we are in water conservation, that everybody thinks about it, that it did go up despite not having that added tourist water use. That those would be the unsavvy ones. They're not watering lawns and such, but it's just an interesting thing to think about, the commercial versus the residential and how it went up during residential and lockdown stuff. I mean, that's just a kind of a sociological phenomenon that I find very curious.
So
Us too.
I'm not sure if I've mastered the screen sharing, but can you see this total water supply graph that's on there?
Yeah.
So one thing that I think is really interesting, and this is true almost every year, but you can see that, I mean, Santa Fe's irrigation season's getting longer and longer. So the non-irrigation season's getting small, but the city's really almost the same. You can see November, December, and then this was the previous January, February, March. That's almost always the case, that the usage is really consistent during the non-irrigation season. So I think basically, you know, this whole, everything kind of above the straight line here is all irrigation water. And so, yeah, with the dry year, it's hard to, I mean, maybe every statistic that we collect is going to have an asterisk next to 2020, because it's hard to figure out how to how to tease apart all those factors you just mentioned. I'm showing you right now our annual report. So this is a draft. You guys are getting a little sneak preview here, but this was our effort to try and look at that shift between residential and commercial. So this is 3 years of water usage. You can see in the back, this is like 3 kind of annual summer irrigation cycles, is those 3 pumps. And this yellow line, this is how statistics are. It's not quite as clean as I'd like, but that's, if we take each month and we take the amount of commercial and divide it by the amount of residential. So we're looking at how much commercial use there is relative to residential. And right here, this is when we all went home in March. And it just drops, right? Like, and it's just the amount of the ratio between the two is just hugely different. There's this one other month that was a little like that historically, but it's only 1 month out of 24. And every single month since we went home for COVID has been like that. So I don't know. We'll see how we deal with statistics, right? It's like we're living in this really statistics and data-driven moment, and at the same time, we're having these exceptional years that are hard to derive statistics from. So I don't know.
Interesting. Very cool. Thanks, you guys. That's really quite insightful. Thank you for the graphs. And Christine, I love hearing more about your background, and I'm actually hearing that you came from Los Alamos and that we have kind of a broad portfolio and maybe a more resilient system. That's really encouraging to hear, because from inside the bubble, it's so terrifying, and it's nice to hear a different perspective. Thank you.
I agree completely. It's really, excuse me, allergy season. But the amount of information that you, Christine, and Andrew have shared today, it's amazing. I mean, we listened to a lot of folks from the city, and this was a time where it all kind of came home, and it was real clear and easy to understand, and really showed the depth and breadth of what you guys are doing. And it's impressive. So thank you very sincerely. And this is one of the Zoom meetings I'm going to really encourage people to come back and watch, because I think this is one that's really important. And that's really one of the values of Zoom meetings, is that we can get people to come back and look at them later on and really get a sense of what we talked about today. But yeah, Andrew, we've always liked you. Christine, you're a great new addition to what we're trying to do. And so we really appreciate the information. Yeah, anyway, so now we're going to go on to the next thing, which is the growth management in a time of drought, which I think fits into what we're talking about. And again, this is where it's so concerning to me. I'm one of these people who drives around and goes, is that going to be the last apartment complex that's going to go in, and then we're not going to have any more water? Which is the last house they're going to build, and then the water is going to go away, kind of stuff. That's where my head goes. And obviously, we've had a more significant impact, I think, out in La Cienega than maybe some other communities because of our location in reference to the aquifer. We're at the very southern tip of the aquifer, so anything that happens above us affects us. You know, and I always talk about the Acequia de La Cienega, which has seen about a 60% reduction in its water resources in the last 40 years, and absolutely struggles right now to provide enough water for their members, for their pacientes. And so it's critical to us in terms of this time of drought. At the same time, we want to do what we can to increase our agricultural production. And so we're caught in that kind of, I guess, conundrum about how you do that, how you're able to grow things when there's not as much water. And again, apologize. But it's one of those things that we are actively working on as well. I mean, we have a lot of people looking at drip systems. We're having people, the Gonzalez's just put in a greenhouse. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at in terms of minimizing the amount of water we need to be able to produce, to be agriculturally productive. So I'm not sure if there's a lot of conversation about this because I think you guys have answered a lot of the questions that may have come up in terms of growth management. But from an outside perspective, we never think it's connected to water management. And so that becomes, I guess, part of the education process that we all need to kind of participate in and get involved with to ensure people understand what's going on. So one of the things we haven't heard from Efren in a while, and what's happening out at wastewater treatment plant. So Efren, you want to share any goings on out at the wastewater treatment plant?
Sure.
Is Efren still? Yes.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Carl. I'm here with Mike Dozier as well. As you all know, we've been going through the Aeration Basin Improvement Project. That started about, I want to say July of 2020. And at that point, we had to cut back to one aeration basin. We usually have two online running at the same time. So once we had to cut back down to one, it kind of cut back our capability to treat to half. So what we as the operations crew here have to do is we have to try to fine tune as best as possible in order to get the results that we're looking for out in the effluent. With the whole COVID situation, we're getting more and more grease coming into the facility. There's a certain microorganism that just really enjoys the grease and it thrives on it, and that's the filamentous bacteria. And what the filamentous bacteria does is it creates a net for solids to catch on, and it creates foam on top of the surface. Because of this whole buildup of grease and a greater inflow of grease coming into our facility, we've had to deal with a lot more of the foam issues in our basin. And it doesn't really help that we have half the capability of the treatment. So what we've been doing is we've been trying to remove it from the surface, and we had to fine tune or make a change in our operation just so that way we can try to accommodate this. And it really wasn't working out. So we kind of changed our mentality on how to operate it, and we got it back under control. So that brings us to another point that we're now about 25%, about a quarter way through the project for the aeration basins. And now that they've made the repairs and the alterations to the North Basin, we're gonna have to switch over to the South Basin, or transfer the contents from the South Basin to the North Basin. And this is gonna cut into the flow going out to the river. And this isn't, it might be for about 48 hours at most. So what we're trying to do is transfer the contents, which is about 3.4 million gallons on the South Basin, going to the North Basin. So it's going to take us some time, and we can't really do it all at once, because then that will affect the microorganisms in our system. So this won't happen for another maybe 1 to 2 months out. But before we start going through with this, we will issue out a notice to everybody downstream and to all our reusers as well.
So on the, I know it sounds a little, say, not so great in the current, but on the good side of switching over to the other basin, the equipment and the upgrades that were done to that basin will help immensely on keeping all the foam out, keeping the all the bacteria aerated constantly. It's a huge difference from running on one basin that we're doing now. Right now with the old system running on one basin, it's really difficult and tedious daily, almost hourly. They're having to make adjustments just to keep it within compliance and not go south. With the other setup, it'll end up being pretty much controlled with the automation that's on it. So it won't have to be something that an operator actually has to be out there checking and testing every hour, and really helps a lot to fine tune and keep everything lined up exactly. The other positive pieces in there is we have one end of our train needed more aeration, so that whole bank is brand new and installed. On the opposite side of that area, there's an area that'll be picking up that has a skimmer that will be able to take anything that wants to float up to the top. Being mainly our issue foam, you can skim it right off so it doesn't keep just creating like a blanket over the whole top of the basin. So we're trying to say giving ourselves some time for the 48-hour piece, but in reality, it shouldn't be more than 24. I mean, 48 hours is giving us more a little cushion just in case we have to do anything different to get that basin running correctly. And what it is when you're switching from one to the other, since the other one is empty, you're having to use everything coming into the plant and everything that you're transferring over to create the volume to fill that basin. Well, what ends up happening there is you don't have any water going out of the plant because you just stopped it. So for everyone downstream, I think probably the only thing that'll be a little aggravational to me is I won't be able to hear the water at night, but it shouldn't stop the flow very much. Being as down here, I know everybody's seen turning on Gaia Debra, a large volume of water there. It probably would just drain that down a little. So the downstream probably wouldn't even notice that it was turned off.
So Efren and Mike, how often is the plant out of compliance?
Has it been?
This last month, I believe we were two times out of compliance, 2 to 3 times, I believe. I'd have to. And that would be for one time for the fecals, and that was issues with our disc filters. And then another time for our nitrates.
You know, I wish there were a way that we could, when those things happen, we could I mean, it's one of those things we've talked about before is we want to communicate to downstream users when something like that happens so they can anticipate. Obviously, we're not into the heavy irrigation season quite yet, although we're getting real close. But just to be able to communicate with those downstream users is something I just think is something that we really have pushed. I mean, one of the things I realized as we were going through, when I was doing the notes that I sent out way too late, but how many times we mentioned downstream users, the importance of notifying them, getting them involved. It was a common theme throughout our last meeting, and it's something. It's got to be more than words. It's got to be actions. It's got to be the ability to really involve them. And Efren and Mike, this is an opportunity to just to let them know, okay, we had a little problem last night, whatever, and we can, I think through Andy, and we can get the word out. We can let people know that hey, this is what happened, and to share that kind of information. Certainly improves the ability for the downstream users, and I don't want to overuse this word, but to trust what's coming from the city, because there are often times in the past when we didn't, and we were concerned, and things happened that we didn't have any control over, and then we'd look at each other and go, well, why was that? Why did that happen? So again, if we can assist you, Efren and Mike, in terms of sharing that information as you get it, we would welcome that opportunity to be part of that. Now, do you have a time frame for when this new construction and new part of the plant is going to be operational?
For the basin that we're putting on would be in, I'm saying 2 months at the max, because we still need to get a few more things on site before we can put that basin in service. The entire project would be, I believe, June of 2022 was their final possible completion date. The actual basins, the main part of the system that is, you know, what we're immediately, it's going to change the plant totally. That will probably be done, both basins, by probably about November, December of this year. Now, the reason it would go till June is we're also installing, let's see, 3 new blowers for the system that create the air to feed into the system. So each one of those, they're not here on site yet. They're actually being built. So there's other pieces that are on it, but the main big piece of construction should be done before the end of the year, which is the actual basins.
Well, I guess I always wonder whether or not we're just patching an old system and adding on to it, rather than really looking at something a little more up to date. And maybe I mean, it just seems there seems to be kind of ongoing, constant issues, and just from a outside perspective, are we just patching something that is going to continue to cause problems for the operators?
No, I don't see by any means that we're just patching something. Now, what we're actually taking part of right now with the EPA and NMED also is we're working on a life cycle analysis for doing some other scenarios of what would be added equipment and processes to the plant, saying like one of the scenarios would be reverse osmosis. One of the other scenarios would be MBRs, the membrane biological reactors, chemical feeds and additions. And with that analysis, it's looking at pretty much the life cycle of the equipment if we were to install it, you know, how it would work, what the city could not necessarily afford, but what it would look like. You know, what kind of byproducts are we going to be creating? What kind of energy are we going to be using? What we're going to be transferring to? I mean, we can right now just start a contract and put in an RO system, but what do we do with the reject? And how much is that reject going to be something that affects the environment in all? Because to run a membrane system, you have RO system, you know, you have to be at over 100 PSI for that water to push through those filters. So now I have 6 different pumps that are going to be running into it, which is also creating this huge carbon footprint that's going to suck up electricity like crazy to take it down to water that has almost nothing in it, turns into a real aggressive water. Water we couldn't just feed directly into the river, because as soon as we start feeding it into the river, it wants to pull every nutrient out of everything that goes into the river. So within a few days putting that kind of water into the river, we'd start seeing yellow trees instantly. You know, the leaves, everything would go bad. So when you feed in something like that, now you have to blend it with another water. So the other aspects of something like RO would be, you get about, if you're really lucky, probably 60% reject and 30% product. So the reject would all be salts and minerals. What do we do with salts and minerals? You know, and a lot of the times, places like here in the Southwest, they want to re-inject those in some deep well. Well, personally, I don't really want to re-inject that into the earth either. But that would usually be what they would do with it. Otherwise, you know, there's no way to just dry off and truck those minerals somewhere.
Yeah, it's interesting now that kind of what we hope for as we look toward a green future is to see a reduction in the use of those minerals for drilling, right?
Right.
Drilling components. So it's kind of a
it's
byproduct.
I was really happy when they told us that they wanted to do this life cycle analysis study, because it looked at every piece of the equipment, every part of how it works over a 20-year cycle and how it affects everything else. I mean,
right.
Once it out, what's more important? You know, what is really going to make the best logical use of what we're trying to get done in the end?
Efren and Mike, if I can kind of interrupt you it's exactly because you said you were doing a life cycle analysis. I'm curious to know, one, I know you're under an EPA NIPDES permit, an NPDES permit that has specific criteria for discharging, but knowing now that you're doing a life cycle analysis, is the plant ISO 14001 certified, or is the plant working towards a 14001 certification, or what's going on with that?
It is not certified in ISO. We have not been working towards that yet, for the fact that, one, working on a life cycle analysis, two, we just reapplied this past month for our NPDES permit. So we still have to get the information back from the NPDES of what is going to be expected of our discharge water moving forward.
Right.
And from previous conversations, they wanted to make it a lot more stringent for the water going out, but we have absolutely no idea, or haven't got any real, you know, like we didn't see any tail signs or anything from the gentleman we were speaking with from EPA that's working on our permit. I mean, nobody's really given us an idea of, are we going to stay the same? Is it going to change? So it'll probably still be about another 60 days before we even have a chance to respond. So
right. Okay, and then mentioning too, nutrient load, or the I guess over purified water that then becomes a drain on the riparian environment. where do you find that balance? Do you have a criteria now for what would be, say, a water of a quality that you're comfortable putting out for I'll be more specific, in downstream users for irrigation, right? And I guess tie it back into what Carl was saying. We really do need some means of knowing, ideally 24 hours. You know, if we would know in La Wahala as soon as there was say an desirable discharge, we would have time before that slug of water or that pulse discharge got down here, and we might be able to protect crops from something that was way out of range and might do harm to them. But so I just want to reinforce that was, you know, what Carl was mentioning. But I'm interested to see if there isn't some mechanism to where maybe EPA's standards need to be brought into line with what we can determine is acceptable for agricultural use. And then that maybe gives some latitude or some breathing room to the treatment plant in determining the quality of the effluent that they're putting out. But it also, the reason I mentioned 14,001 is because of the life cycle analysis that's just happening. It sounds promising that that's something that's going on now, but it may not have been what has been going on in the past for a sustainable operation, which is maybe why I think Carl has the question of what are we doing here, trying to put lipstick on a pig or making the silk purse from the sow's ear, or, you know, is it something that we can use the existing system and evolve it, or is it something that we have to look at completely radically replacing? I don't know.
I know with the analysis, we'll see a little bit more information to back it, but I don't see that this plant is, you know, just being band-aided for now, because immediately with these changes that we're making right now, it's something that should have been done, you know, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and it will be a lot more robust in the treatment once that setup is put in play. The craziest thing that kind of coincides with Christine's efforts is this plant, the biggest problems and hardest challenges that we have to deal with are solids, and the less water used, the more our solids build up, and you don't end up getting the dilutions that most treatment plants do. So right now, the way that everything's being looked at when we're adding to the plant or redesigning something is really, you know, calculating on, we're going to get less and less water to be mixed with these solids. Now, at this point, it hasn't got to the point where it's not flowing through collection systems, but that may be something in the future that we end up having to water our collection systems down in certain areas just to keep them moving. You know, it's that double-edged sword that it's amazing that we're in the desert and people are taking on to the conservation so much, but it affects us in a huge way as opposed to other places that don't have as much of this, not necessarily the conservation, but as much of the low flow of water through the systems.
So this is Efren again. I've been here for 19 years at this facility. And when we had both aeration basins online, operational, and in proper working order, we could definitely meet the standards that were going out. And that's with operators doing rounds every 2 hours. And I can say this, that when we have this new system online, this system is going to be checking every, not 2 hours, but every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. So it will be making the changes accordingly for those every 15 minutes. So we will be running more efficient than what we used to in the past. I don't know if that helps any.
Well, it does. I mean, but again, I know the challenges that you guys are facing. And obviously those challenges are things that affect all the downstream users. So anything we can do to support your efforts, we would like to do that. We're just concerned when we're not made aware of situations that impact those downstream users. It's a little frustrating sometimes because it would, again, what Darren said, if we had some notice, say, okay, guys, there's something coming down the river. It's, be aware of this. It's certainly, I mean, again, when we do this tour, I think you'll get a sense of and and unfortunately, we can't include La Bajada because it's a little bit of a drive. That's a separate tour completely and totally. But I think once you take this tour, you get a sense of what people are actually doing with that river water. I mean, Tres Rios Ranch is the largest, garden, the largest organic garden or farm in Santa Fe County. It's 24 acres and derives about, I'm guessing about 90% of its water from the river, and then about 10% from the La Cienega Creek. There's a little bit of water rights there. And the Rael Ranch, which is another really incredible place. And Ed Series' place, Jose Varela's place, all those guys are using that water to farm with. And so just to know when to maybe shut down the irrigation for that day or a couple days, whatever, would be of great help. So. And Darren, I don't think you know Christine, and I want to introduce you. Darren, this is Christine Chavez. And again, one of the things that comes across so often with you, Darren, is your wealth of knowledge. And I think in my notes, I said, I'd like to sit down with you and just kind of explore to document this vast knowledge you have of the history of water issues along the Santa Fe River. I mean, and your knowledge is pretty vast. So I just want to make sure that you're properly introduced to Ms. Chavez, and this is Ms. Munfing. Now, Darren is a captain on a merchant marine large freight boat, right? Is that
well? No, I've just retired from commanding a vehicle carrier.
Officially retired?
Not going to sea. Got too much business to do here with you guys.
That's good to hear, because we would see him periodically, or he'd be in the middle of the ocean somewhere, and we would be difficult getting in touch with him. So that's good to hear. That's excellent.
Now I'll be removed for shorter periods of time. No.
Okay. Okay. That's good to hear. All right. Hey, Andy, we don't have William, so do we want to do or maybe Darren, you can do it, an Acequia update?
Let me do one quick thing before that is to reiterate to Efren and Mike that, if, so I'm the keeper of the database, if you will, for this group. And if you send me something Carl does and some announcements or any news, I can get it out within, 5-10 minutes to, 85, 90 people. And I'm thinking of, the classic was the girls' school who was sitting in their water, doing their their water quality monitoring, and it would be good for them to know if they shouldn't be doing that at a certain time.
Well, and just so everyone knows, we just finished the Limpia and started running the water through the Acequia Madre now. So we're beginning irrigation in La Bajada. So yeah, please let us know. It's just time we're putting seed in the ground and sprouts in the ground, and you know, we're making the investment now, so please help us protect it through this season.
So do y'all have any reference numbers that we can use to that I guess somewhat dictates what would be acceptable for growing?
No, I'm actually looking at the EPA site right now, but haven't found anything that explains what the water quality limits would look like.
And that would be good information for us. And Carl, Andy, Darren, last year I was taking that upon myself to send out those emails notifying everybody of what's going on, and it hasn't been happening. I've had personal issues myself that I've had to deal with, but they will continue. I will start, doing those again if anything comes up. But if we can get information of, standards that we, for growing, the quality of the water, I mean, that would definitely help us out, and we can
Okay.
add into
Yeah,
our.
and I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about, is if you're not finding anything specifically from EPA, it may be as simple as getting data from USDA or getting some interagency communication. So, yes. Well, Andy,
The reason we ask is more for, just to at least have some kind of comparison of what, if we're, a lot of the times we're out of compliance for our MPDES permit, but we have already one of the most stringent in New Mexico, other than Red River. So
yeah, no, our point would not to be to increase the burden on you. It's actually to find some opportunity where you might have some beneficial. Although my basic understanding is that we're overloaded with nutrients generally in this water.
and the main portion of the nutrient overloading is when they were taking a lot of the samples through that riparian area that's between us and Kaya Debra Bridge. And the hardest part that I have with it is wish there was some way that we could come to some agreement with everybody to go in and actually do something there, not just let it be a waste zone that, all the cattails and everything fall over every year and it just adds to it. Anything the city's ever put out sits in that dirt too. And then a large storm comes through and it washes off the top surface. Well, then now the lower areas, the problem are getting that problem from down there. And in the end, no matter how clean we make it here, we still can't, control what's happening over there. Animal feces or the water that's just been there forever, or nutrients that are in the soils. I mean, that area, I wish there was just some way that it could be, turned into a real, actual area that is, doing something to rid the problem, not create another pile of problems.
That gets to the constructed treatment wetlands.
Yeah.
And that's really, again, I mean, that's one of the things I was thinking as Darren was talking, is we have to factor in the nutrient sump that is the wetlands below the treatment plant and what that contributes to the water. And it's almost like we need a whole separate testing system that comes through on the other side of Kaya Debra, I guess would be the best place to really get a sense of what's going on. And that's one of those things I think we need to really push and figure out to get that kind of testing done on a fairly regular basis, so we have a better picture. So what goes in and then what comes out of that as many people have described, nutrient sump. And it's been going on for as long as the wetlands have been there. And there's been no attention in terms of dealing with that. And one of the things I think environmentalists should be concerned about is that's a horrible beaver habitat. Why would you want to have beaver in that kind of water, in that kind of situation? But the contamination goes beyond the water, it goes into the soil. And so that is one of those huge issues that we have to address and figure out, because we can do all the other things well, and then if that's not taken care of, it's really for naught.
Well, okay, but there now we see even there's I guess an expressed need from the plant, you know, so that's got to be a voice there, Carl. There's a voice from within the collaborative that, you know, something we have in common, that we need to get that, be able to address that, and kind of all gang up on that one patch of, on that one patch of problem river, right?
You've been around this for a while. What do you think? What are your thoughts, Andrew?
Well, I mean, I think one of the potential things that's going to happen to that section is that county river trail. And I actually don't know. It seems like maybe I should, but I don't really know what the county's plans are for extending the river trail down into La Cienega. But it seems like the river trail has been a bigger hit than it was back when it was an idea. And that it's been pretty popular in the city, and I don't think we've seen the increase in crime for people along the river that was one of the real concerns for downstream folks. So maybe there's some potential for that. I mean, it does seem like, it seems like a great opportunity to do something, you know, interesting and try some things out, because that huge stretch of river is mostly city owned. It's, I don't know if Christine knows this, but it's in the airport property. There's sort of like the airport's up on like a, I don't know if it was leveled, or it must have been leveled, right, to make runways out of it. So it's like this mesa above the river right there.
Exactly, yeah.
And then it drops down, and there's this stretch through the back. And so when I first joined this group, there was some discussion about whether birds and the wetlands were going to be a concern, and that turned out not to be the case. I mean, as much as it's a wetland here, it's nothing compared to Maryland, and they have an airport, so there's a way around this. But yeah, so I mean, I think there's got to be a way to kind of work with it, you know, that it's definitely a good, we're working on this county city relationship, and I think this might not be low hanging fruit, right? This might be at least middle of the tree fruit.
Pretty high up the tree. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe high up on the tree, but I got to think like starting to work together with the county is a good way to start tackling these things, because Calle Debra is like a real impact zone between the city and county right there. And it's, you know, everything above is city, everything below is county owned. The bridge itself is, I don't know. I mean, it seems like the bridge itself maybe could use some attention, and some restoration work that was sort of continuous amongst those two properties seems like a good opportunity. So Christina, we can add that to our 5-year plan, right? We'll get together with the county, being able to, I mean, it's tough, right? It plays out slowly. There was this rural protection zone plan that I think you guys know about, that the city passed at one point. And I think what they wanted was kind of, maybe not quite what we got, right? Like overgrown, but I think my understanding is that it was sort of I don't know, hammered out like cow pasture before the efforts went into try and like whatever it was that included the introduction of the beaver and put in all those cattails and everything. I mean, I've seen some photos, although I actually think they're from the 60s. I don't know that I've ever seen anything from like the 90s, shortly before that project was done. So it's tough because they wanted to kind of get some restoration work in there, but it doesn't get any maintenance. It's really overgrown. The fact that there's beavers means it's full of dead trees because all the stuff is kind of fallen over in there. And the fact that it belongs to the airport, I mean, they've got a lot of work to do, and that I don't think is really much of a priority for them. So I don't know.
And
what's that, Andy?
I was going to say, as a bioremediation, they usually like to line those areas. And so and of course wasn't lined. So the notion would be to really build a new one. And maybe I'm going to say upstream or to the east of where the outflow is from the wastewater treatment plant, build a whole new wetlands area on that. And then with that area, go in there and do some management on that to basically kind of clear it out. And this is something that, other city staffers have mentioned as a possibility, but that's as far as it's gone. And so this may be the new challenge. Kind of a similar thing with you guys, Efren and Mike, is really probably the best thing to do is to build a whole new wastewater treatment plant. But I mean, what, $30 million? I don't have it, you know. But, and then we can start on that. But
Well, if you guys want to pay the half of the $330 million tax, we'll gladly build one.
So
Yeah, I mean, Boeing's still flying the same planes from the 70s, and those aren't even close to 330 million.
So, but I think that getting all these potential projects on the list, if you will, and just kind of, it's getting them on the list and on the radar. And that was something too that Darren was involved in at the downstream irrigators meeting of 3 weeks ago now, I think it was, that, you know, it's kind of what, you know, Bill Snyder has encouraged us all to do is let's get the list going. I mean, that's my summary of it.
We can help with that without question. And maybe that's something we should really prioritize and maybe put it into a letter to the city and county and saying, hey, these are the things that we need to get, we've identified that need to be addressed.
And to get it into any NEPA process is the key. I mean, city and county is great. But most of them know about it. So, yeah.
I think having Carl on the Water Policy Advisory Committee is going to be great too, because I mean, just like Anjali said, like the county's a big place, right? So that much more so than the city where, you know, everybody lives within, I don't know, 10 miles of each other. The county has a much more diverse range of folks who are kind of represented on, or of communities that are represented by the people who are on that committee. So your community has not been very well represented. And I don't think it's because it's on purpose. It's just that the county's a gigantic place, right? That would be great.
And JJ Gonzalez is also going to be on that group. He's the Acequia representative. So he brings a wealth of knowledge and history, water history to the table. And I think the two of us will hopefully contribute in a way that's positive and kind of moves things forward. So
and Brian Romero's on that group too, who he doesn't irrigate around here, but he does irrigate just a little bit north, and I think has a real sensibility for acequias and a tremendous amount of knowledge about the city and the wastewater plant too. So they've got, yeah, great.
Where's he from? I know the name and I couldn't figure out where he's from.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to forget exactly which position he had because he retired a 5 years ago. It's terrible how fast.
Right, yeah. That's where I remember the name from then.
Yeah.
And do you got anything about the educational committee? Do you want to talk about that at all?
No, I think we're good on that. And Darren and the downstream irrigators meeting, I think, was a good meeting, but that may be something that we can talk about, you know, or send out notes from it or something like that, maybe.
Okay, that sounds good.
Just to get everybody involved.
Okay. Now, I think obviously my notes were a little late this time. I'm going to do the notes from this meeting a lot quicker because I think, again, in a small group, we've got a whole lot of stuff talked about and some really interesting things that we need to share with the entire collaborative, because there seems to be an opportunity again, and Christine and Andrew, the city-county relationship now that we need to build upon. And one of the things that Felicity and I agreed to is to go after the resolution that Joseph Maes just did that says the city and county can't work together. So we will do that soon. But I think there's some opportunities, and having Mr. Munzberger more readily available is something I view as a real blessing. And so that knowledge base.
You're very kind. Okay, so just for fun fact, okay, factoids. In Olympia the other day, I picked up, I wish I had it handy. It would be too hard to see on the screen, but a genuine state of Chihuahua, Mexico, 1865 quarter real, right out, come right up in the pala, out from the bed of the Acequia. So My boy has marked the spot with a piece of string. He thinks the rest of the caja is down off to the side of the bank or something, but anyway, so, but yeah, so that, history's alive. We're living in it, right? That's what is our unique heritage along the Santa Fe River, is that we too are part of that living history, huh? It's continuing. So, and I'm at least, glad to see that, Efren and Mike there, that we can communicate and from one end of this stretch of the lower river to the other. And that's positive. So very positive to be able to hear these kinds of conversations instead of just a bunch of naysaying nabobs and, good with a small group too. I think maybe what we have to do is maybe set up our upcoming meetings as maybe more action-packed agendas. Get some of these players to a table together to make a decision,
Yeah. Well, the next meeting is going to,
management of that artificial wetlands in very abstract and non-tangible terms. We kind of need to figure out how we get boots on the ground and in the bosque there and start tending to it.
agreed. And our next meeting will feature Stacy Timmons with the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources to talk about the connection between the Santa Fe River and the Rio Grande. And so that'll be an interesting opportunity. But I agree, Darren. It's like there is a time to act, and this is the time to act, and we need to bring more attention to this. And we've got the information that we need to share, and make sure that the policymakers understand that we've got to do something, and it's got to be done now. And really, I think that sounds funny, but a time of drought may be the best time to do it. So thanks to all of you for today. Any other things people want to talk about?
So I just want to see if you all find any standards, water quality standards that need to be met for growing. If you can share them with me, that would be greatly appreciated.
We will work on that for sure.
And we'll look as well on our end as well.
Thank you, Andrew, Christine, Andy, everybody, Darren and Efren and Mike. Good talking to you, and we'll see you next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.